The rain was coming down in that steady, suburban way that turned the driveway into a shallow river and made the windows of our two-story colonial on Maple Lane fog from the inside out. The kind of afternoon where I usually brewed a second pot of coffee just to have something warm to wrap my hands around while Noah was still at middle school and Ben was grinding through another day at the marketing firm downtown. But today the mug sat untouched beside his forgotten phone on the kitchen island, the screen lighting up with a notification that sliced straight through the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of thunder. Because 3 days earlier, he had slid that diamond onto my finger at the corner bistro where Noah had beamed like it was the best plot twist in one of the family movies we streamed on Netflix after soccer practice, and I had said yes with tears blurring the candlelight because after 13 years of shared mortgages and late-night talks about college funds and the way Ben always remembered to pick up my favorite oat milk on his way home from the office, it felt like the natural next chapter, not a rewrite. Yet here I was, alone in the house, with the takeout containers from last night's ties still stacked in the sink, and my laptop open to half-finished wedding mood boards, when the phone buzzed again, and my thumb moved before my brain could stop it, unlocking the screen with the passcode we'd used since Noah's birth, because trust had never been a question until that exact second, when Lisa from his office's name appeared with the preview message that landed like a punch to the sternum. Can't stop replaying last weekend in that hotel. When can we do it again now that the ring's on her finger? And I opened the thread because the floor was already tilting beneath me, scrolling through months of escalating exchanges that started with innocent lunch complaints about workload, but turned into photos of rumpled sheets and confessions that he felt seen in ways I apparently hadn't managed lately amid my freelance deadlines and Noah's sudden middle school mood swings. The words blurring as my chest caved in with a grief so physical it tasted metallic. Memories crashing over me of the weekend Ben claimed was a client retreat, but now read as stolen nights while I had been home helping Noah study for his science test, and wondering why he seemed distant yet overcompensated with surprise coffees and extra hugs. The proposal itself now retroactively poisoned, because how many times had he kissed me goodnight after texting her? How many family dinners had he sat through carrying that secret while I planned our future like the naive fool who still believed the ring meant forever instead of damage control? And the guilt flickered too, because maybe my long hours buried in Photoshop had left him lonely enough to look elsewhere. But no, that was the trap, the way betrayal always tried to hand you half the blame. And I was still staring at the screen when his car tires crunched over the wet gravel outside, headlights sweeping across the rain-streaked glass, his key turning in the lock with the same familiar jingle that used to signal safety. And when he stepped inside, shaking droplets from his jacket, the smile died on his face the instant he registered my expression and the phone clutched in my white-knuckled grip, his shoulders dropping as he whispered my name like a plea. "Sarah, wait, it's not..." But the words were already spilling out of me, raw and unfiltered. "How long, Ben? And was the proposal just the cleanup crew? Because I can't unsee these messages. And I said yes thinking we were past the hard parts, past the therapy we joked about needing after Noah's rough year." And he stood there dripping onto the tile, eyes filling with the kind of tears that looked real but felt like another layer of performance now, confessing in halting bursts that it had started 6 months ago during a rough patch when my client crunch and his quarterly reports left us passing like ships, that it was only physical a handful of times, and he had ended it the week before buying the ring because he realized what he stood to lose with Noah calling him dad in that tentative new way, and me still being the woman who knew every quirk of his morning routine down to the exact way he liked his eggs scrambled. Yet the timestamps on the latest texts proved the breakup had been partial at best, a weekend tryst after the ring purchase that made my stomach twist so violently I had to grip the counter. The everyday details of our life suddenly grotesque. The swing set visible through the rain-blurred window where we pushed Noah on weekends, the stack of his dress shirts I'd ironed yesterday, the shared Google Calendar still color-coded for family dinners and school runs. All of it refracted through the lens of his deception until I couldn't breathe around the anger and the sorrow braiding together into something heavier than either alone. Telling him in a voice that sounded foreign to my own ears that he needed to sleep somewhere else tonight, anywhere but our bed, because the thought of lying beside him while my mind replayed every intimate line from that thread was unbearable. And he nodded without argument, already moving towards the guest room with the defeated slump of a man who knew the ground had shifted, the two of us navigating the hallway in tense silence as the school bus headlights appeared at the end of the street, signaling Noah's imminent arrival, forcing me to swallow the scream building in my throat and paste on the practiced mom smile I'd used through stomach flu nights and work disappointments, because protecting our son from the immediate wreckage was the only plan I could cling to in that moment, even as the ring on my finger felt like a shackle instead of a promise, and the quiet hope I had carried into this engagement 3 short days ago evaporated into the damp gray air, leaving only the stark realization that the future I had been sketching in soft pastels on my laptop now demanded an entirely different blueprint, one I wasn't sure my heart was ready to draft, but one I knew with bone-deep certainty I could no longer ignore. The house felt colder after Ben carried his pillow and a spare blanket down to the guest room, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed louder than any slammed argument ever could. And I stood in our bedroom doorway, staring at the king bed we'd bought together 5 years ago, when Noah was still small enough to crawl between us during thunderstorms. The duvet still rumpled from this morning when I'd kissed Ben goodbye, thinking the biggest decision left in our marriage was whether to book the venue with the lake view or the garden courtyard. But now every crease in the sheets looked like evidence of nights he hadn't come home to me, and the silence pressed in until I couldn't stand it anymore. So I went downstairs to the living room, wrapped myself in the throw blanket that still smelled faintly of Noah shampoo for movie nights, and sat on the couch with the lights off except for the blue glow of my phone screen as I reread the messages I'd screenshotted before handing his phone back, each one carving deeper grooves into the raw place inside my chest where hope used to live. The timestamps showing late-night exchanges while I was upstairs reading Noah his Percy Jackson chapters or answering client emails until my eyes burned. And the worst part wasn't even the explicit details, but the casual affection threaded through them. The way he called her babe, the same way he still called me sometimes. The inside jokes about coworkers I knew. The complaints about my long hours that I'd heard him voice to me directly, but never with this level of bitterness. And I kept waiting for the anger to crest into something clean and burning, but instead it kept dissolving into this heavy, aching grief for the version of us I thought we were becoming. The one where the ring was supposed to mean we'd chosen each other again after the drift that parenthood and careers had carved between us. And around midnight, I heard the guest room door open, soft footsteps padding toward the kitchen, the refrigerator light spilling yellow across the hallway floor before he closed it again. And I stayed perfectly still, listening to the clink of a glass filling at the sink, the quiet exhale that sounded like he was trying not to cry. And for a stupid second, I wanted to go to him, to wrap my arms around the man I'd loved since we were 23 and still believed love was mostly effort and timing. But the screenshots were still open on my phone, and the thought of touching him made my skin crawl with the memory of how many times he must have come home from her and kissed me goodnight anyway. So I stayed frozen until he retreated back upstairs, the guest room door closing again, and only then did I let the first real sob escape, muffled into the throw blanket so Noah wouldn't hear if he woke up needing water. Morning arrived gray and damp, the rain still tapping against the windows like it had no intention of stopping, and I moved through the routine on autopilot, brewing coffee in the French press Ben preferred because he said it tasted cleaner than the pod machine, packing Noah's lunch with the turkey sandwich he liked cut diagonally and the apple slices he pretended to hate but always ate, waking him with the gentle knock and the reminder that it was Thursday, so gym closed today. And when he stumbled downstairs, rubbing his eyes, he asked where Dad was, and I managed to say Ben had to leave early for a meeting without my voice cracking too obviously, though Noah's 11-year-old radar picked up something because he paused mid-bite of cereal and studied me with those serious hazel eyes that were so much like Ben's it hurt to look at them, then shrugged and went back to scrolling his tablet for the latest Minecraft update, sparing me the follow-up questions I wasn't ready to answer. Ben appeared in the kitchen doorway around 7:30, showered and dressed for work in the navy button-down I'd bought him last Christmas, hair still damp, and the sight of him looking so normal, tie knotted perfectly, phone already in hand checking emails, made the rage flare fresh, because how dare he stand there like yesterday hadn't happened, like the ring on my finger wasn't burning a hole through my skin. And when our eyes met, he flinched like I'd slapped him, then crossed to the coffee maker and poured himself a mug with hands that shook just enough for me to notice, murmuring, "I didn't sleep," as if that were supposed to make me feel sorry for him. And I said nothing, just watched him add the exact 2 spoons of sugar he always did. The small domestic ritual that used to feel intimate now felt like a performance. And when Noah bounded in asking if Dad could drive him to school today, Ben looked at me for permission the way he never had before, and I nodded once because canceling the carpool rhythm would raise more questions than I could handle right now. So they left together, Noah chattering about the new Fortnite skin, Ben murmuring responses in that careful voice he used when he was trying not to cry. And the house emptied out so fast it felt like someone had pulled the plug, leaving me alone with the half-finished wedding Pinterest board still open on my laptop, and the realization that I had said yes to a man who was already planning how to keep his other life running parallel. And the tears came again, hot and useless, until my phone buzzed with a text from him. "I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes. Please don't take off the ring yet." And I stared at those words for a long minute, thumb hovering over the reply button, before I typed back the only thing that felt true in that moment. I don't know what whatever it takes even means anymore. Then I turned the phone face down on the counter, picked up my own mug of coffee that had gone cold, and carried it to the window where I watched the rain streak the glass and wondered how many more mornings like this we had left before one of us decided the damage was too deep to keep trying. The quiet of the house wrapping around me like a shroud, while somewhere downtown Ben sat through meetings pretending everything was fine, and Noah laughed with friends in the school cafeteria, both of them carrying pieces of a secret that was slowly cracking the foundation we'd all been standing on for years. By Friday afternoon, the rain had finally eased into a fine mist that clung to the maple leaves outside and turned the school pickup line into a slow parade of headlights and windshield wipers, and I sat in the driver's seat of the minivan with the heat blasting because the damp chill had settled into my bones the way grief sometimes does when it decides to stay a while, watching Noah emerge from the double doors in his navy hoodie zipped to the chin, backpack slung over one shoulder, scanning the cars until he spotted me and broke into that quick half-smile that still belonged to the little boy who used to run full tilt into my arms after preschool, though now he walked with the deliberate cool of someone who had just turned 12 and was practicing indifference, and when he climbed in, he immediately noticed the empty passenger seat where Ben usually waited with his phone in hand, pretending to check work emails, but really just wanting to be the first to hear about the day's small dramas. And Noah's brow furrowed as he buckled in and asked, "Is Dad still at that meeting?" Because that was the story I'd fed him yesterday and the day before, careful not to let the lie stretch too thin, and I nodded once, throat tight, then added, "He might be late tonight too." Which wasn't entirely untrue, since Ben had texted mid-morning that he was booking a hotel room near the office so he wouldn't crowd the house while we figured things out, a gesture that felt both considerate and cowardly, and Noah accepted the answer with a shrug that didn't quite hide the flicker of worry in his eyes, the same look he'd worn last spring when his best friend moved across the state and the group chat suddenly had one less notification. So I reached over and squeezed his knee the way I used to when he was small and scared of the dark, murmuring, "Everything's gonna be okay, bud," even though the words tasted like ash because I had no idea if they were true anymore. And he nodded, but didn't press, just plugged his phone into the aux cord and played the same lo-fi playlist he'd been looping for weeks, the soft beats filling the car so he didn't have to talk about the empty space beside me, or the way my left hand kept flexing around the steering wheel, the diamond catching the dashboard light like a tiny accusation every time I shifted gears. Back home, I kept the evening routine moving on rails, homework spread across the kitchen table while I chopped vegetables for stir-fry, the sizzle of garlic and soy sauce masking the silence that would have otherwise pressed in too hard. And when Ben's key turned in the lock around 7, I felt Noah tense beside me on the couch where we'd migrated for math flashcards, his pencil pausing mid-equation, and Ben stepped inside carrying a paper bag from the corner deli that sold the roast beef sandwiches Noah loved, an offering that looked so painfully rehearsed I almost laughed. But instead I stood and said quietly, "Not tonight," before he could even set the bag down, my voice low enough that Noah wouldn't catch the edge, but firm enough that Ben understood this wasn't negotiable. And he froze in the doorway, shoulders dropping as he registered the boundary I was drawing for the first time in 13 years of marriage, then nodded once and turned to leave again. But Noah's voice cut through the tension. "Dad!" Small and uncertain, and Ben looked at our son with something raw and desperate in his expression, the same look he'd worn the night Noah spiked a fever at 3 a.m. and we took turns holding him in the ER waiting room, and he crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt in front of the couch, and said, "Hey, buddy, I'm just working late this week, okay? But I'll see you tomorrow, promise." And Noah searched his face for the lie we both knew was there, but didn't have the language to name yet, then leaned forward and hugged him hard, the kind of hug that lasted longer than usual, and when Ben finally stood, his eyes were wet, and he mouthed, "Thank you," to me over Noah's head, before retreating to the foyer, leaving the deli bag on the counter like a deposit on a debt he wasn't sure he could repay. After Noah went upstairs to shower, I sat at the island staring at the untouched sandwiches until the bread went soft, then wrapped them in foil and tucked them in the fridge for tomorrow's lunch, because wasting food felt like one more small betrayal I couldn't stomach right now. And when my phone buzzed with a text from Ben, "I'm in room 214 at the Holiday Inn on Route 9 if you need anything. I love you both." It took everything not to type back something cruel, something about how love wasn't supposed to come with hotel room numbers and alibis, but instead I sent a single word, "Okay." Then I opened my laptop and searched for individual therapy near me, scrolling through profiles of counselors who specialized in betrayal trauma and attachment wounds, booking the first available slot for Monday morning because if I was going to protect Noah from the worst of this, I needed someone to help me carry the weight so it didn't crush him by accident. And as I closed the tab, I glanced at the framed photo on the fridge, Noah between us at the beach last summer, all 3 of us sunburned and laughing, Ben's arm around my waist like it belonged there, and for the first time since I saw those messages, I let myself feel the grief instead of the anger, the quiet sorrow of knowing that picture was still true in some ways, but irrevocably altered in others. And I touched the ring still on my finger, not ready to take it off, but not ready to believe in it either, then went upstairs to kiss Noah goodnight, lingering in his doorway while he pretended to be asleep so I could watch the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and remind myself that whatever happened between his father and me, this boy was the one thing we had gotten unequivocally right, the one piece of our life that still felt solid beneath the cracks spreading through everything else. Saturday morning arrived with a brittle kind of sunshine that made the wet leaves on the driveway glisten like they were trying too hard to pretend the week hadn't happened, and I woke up earlier than usual because sleep had become a shallow, restless thing since Ben moved to the Holiday Inn. My body still tuned to the rhythm of his breathing beside me, even though the bed was empty on his side, so I slipped downstairs in yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, started the coffee maker, and stood at the kitchen window watching the neighborhood come alive. Mr. Patel across the street walking his golden retriever, the teenage girl 2 houses down jogging with earbuds in, the usual Saturday traffic of minivans heading to soccer fields and dance dance recitals, and for the first time in days, the normalcy outside felt like something I could borrow, something to wrap around the sharp edges inside me so they didn't cut quite so deep when Noah came down for breakfast, asking if we could go to the farmer's market like we sometimes did on weekends when Ben had time off, his voice casual but his eyes watchful, and I heard myself say yes before the hesitation could take root, because keeping the small rituals felt like the only way to hold the pieces together while everything else shifted. So we drove the 20 minutes to the open-air market in the old mill district, windows cracked to let in the crisp air that smelled of cinnamon donuts and fresh-cut flowers, and Noah walked beside me with his hands in his pockets, pointing out the honey stall that sold the lavender kind he liked on toast, and the booth with handmade leather bracelets he pretended not to care about but kept glancing at, and I bought him one anyway, the dark brown one with a small silver clasp, slipping it onto his wrist while he rolled his eyes but didn't take it off, and for those couple of hours the weight on my chest lifted just enough that I could breathe without counting inhales, could smile at the vendor handing me a paper bag of apples without feeling like I was performing for an audience of one, though every time my phone buzzed in my pocket I flinched because part of me still expected Ben's name to appear with another apology or explanation or plea, but I'd turned notifications off for his number last night after staring at his "I love you both" text until the screen dimmed, so the vibrations were only work emails and a reminder from the therapy appointment I'd booked for Monday. And when we got home with our haul, kale for smoothies I'd probably never make, sourdough that would go stale if we didn't eat it fast, a bunch of sunflowers because Noah said the house needed more yellow. I texted my sister Claire instead of calling because a call would have cracked my voice and I wasn't ready for her to hear it yet, typing out the bare bones in the laundry room while Noah was upstairs changing out of muddy sneakers. Ben cheated. Found out Wednesday. He's at a hotel. Noah doesn't know the details. I need space this weekend. Can I come stay tomorrow night? And she replied almost immediately. Of course. Pack a bag. I'll make up the guest room. Bring wine. We'll talk when you're ready. And the permission to leave, even for 24 hours, felt like the first real breath I'd taken since the rain started. So I spent the rest of the afternoon quietly packing. Underwear, pajamas, the charger, my journal that I hadn't opened in months because who had time for introspection when deadlines loomed and soccer schedules conflicted with client calls. And when Ben texted around 4 asking if he could come by to see Noah, I replied with the rules I'd been turning over in my head all day. You can pick him up at 5 for pizza and arcade like you planned. Bring him back by 9. No wedding talk in front of him. No sleeping here. And he responded with a simple, "Thank you, I'll follow whatever you said," which should have felt like progress, but mostly felt like the saddest kind of victory because it meant we were already negotiating visitation in our own home. He arrived right on time, still in the same jeans and gray hoodie from yesterday, hair looking like he'd run his hands through it too many times, and when Noah bounded down the stairs excited about the new air hockey table at the arcade, Ben's face softened in that unguarded way that used to make my heart turn over, and he hugged our son tight before looking at me over Noah's shoulder with eyes that asked 100 questions he didn't dare voice. Are we okay? Is this the end? What happens next? And I gave him nothing back except a small nod toward the door, a silent acknowledgement that the boundary was holding, then watched them drive away in his SUV, taillights disappearing around the corner while I stood on the porch until the air turned too cold to bear, went inside, locked the door behind me, and sat on the couch with the sunflowers and a mason jar on the coffee table, their heavy heads already drooping a little like they knew the weekend was only a temporary reprieve. That night I slept in our bed for the first time since the discovery, alone but not haunted the way I'd feared, the sheets still carrying the faint trace of Ben's shampoo even though I'd washed them Thursday in a fit of fury. And when I woke up Sunday morning, the house was quiet, except for the hum of the furnace kicking on, made coffee, packed the overnight bag, left a note for Noah explaining I was visiting Aunt Claire, and would be back Monday afternoon in time for his piano lesson, then drove the 40 minutes to her condo on the edge of the city, windows down despite the chill because I needed the wind to feel like motion, like forward. And when Claire opened the door, she didn't ask questions right away, just pulled me into a hug that smelled of the vanilla candle she always burned and the laundry detergent we'd both used since childhood, then poured 2 glasses of the Pinot Noir she had chilling and sat me on her balcony where the city lights were just starting to flicker on below us, and I told her everything. The messages, the hotel weekend after the proposal, the way the ring now felt like a question mark instead of an answer, and she listened without interrupting, only reaching over once to squeeze my hand when my voice broke on Noah's name. And when I finished, she said quietly, "You don't have to decide anything tonight, or tomorrow, but you do have to decide what you want to protect most, your heart, your son, the life you built, or some combination that doesn't leave you hollow." And I nodded because the words landed exactly where they were meant to. Then we talked about practical things, separate bank accounts if it came to that, how to explain therapy to Noah without scaring him, whether I should keep wearing the ring or put it in a drawer until the confusion cleared, and by the time we finished the bottle and the city had settled into its nighttime rhythm, I felt the first faint stirrings of something like agency. Not hope exactly, but the knowledge that I could choose the next step instead of waiting for it to happen to me. And when I crawled into her guest bed later, phone on silent, and the ring still on my finger because taking it off felt too final too soon, I let myself imagine a future where Ben and I might sit across from each other in a therapist's office and actually hear each other, where Noah could keep both parents without having to pick sides, where trust could be rebuilt brick by painful brick instead of crumbling all at once. And though the vision was blurry and fragile, I held on to it long enough to fall asleep, the city humming faintly beyond the window like a reminder that life kept moving even when mine felt paused. And for the first time in 4 days, I didn't dream of screenshots or hotel keys, only of sunlight on water and the sound of Noah laughing somewhere close by. Monday morning felt like stepping onto a stage with the lights already up and no script in hand, the alarm pulling me out of Claire's guest bed at 6:15 sharp because I had to be back home by 8 to get Noah ready for school and make sure the house didn't look like it had been abandoned mid-crisis. So I drove the quiet highway with the first real daylight in days, breaking pale across the fields. Radio off because even the softest NPR segment would have felt like too much noise against the steady thrum of my own thoughts. How to face Ben when he dropped Noah off after their Sunday night arcade outing, whether to mention the therapy appointment I'd kept secret from everyone but Claire, if wearing the ring today was still an act of hope or just stubborn denial. And when I pulled into the driveway, the minivan was still warm from the engine, Ben's SUV idling at the curb like he'd been waiting to hand off our son without crossing the property line I'd drawn. And Noah climbed out carrying the backpack he'd forgotten Saturday, waving a quick goodbye to his dad before jogging up the steps, and Ben stayed in the driver's seat, window down, looking at me through the windshield with the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep, dark circles under his eyes and the same gray hoodie he'd worn all weekend. And when our gazes locked, he lifted a hand in a small, hesitant wave that I didn't return, but didn't ignore either, just nodded once before turning to follow Noah inside, closing the front door with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. The morning routine unfolded in its familiar choreography. Cereal bowls rinsed, permission slips signed for the upcoming field trip, lunch packed with a leftover roast beef sandwich from Friday that I'd sliced thin so it wouldn't go to waste, and Noah chattered about beating his dad at air hockey 3 times in a row, his voice bright but his glances toward the empty chair at the table longer than usual, and I answered with the half smiles and mm-hms that kept the conversation moving without inviting deeper questions, then drove him to the bus stop and watched him disappear up the steps with his friends, the yellow bus pulling away while I sat there gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached, because the silence after he left was the moment I'd been bracing for all weekend. The first therapy session, 45 minutes from now in a small office suite 10 minutes from home that smelled faintly of lavender diffuser and fresh printer paper when I walked in. Dr. Elena Marquez was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s maybe, dark hair pulled into a low bun and eyes that held steady without staring, and she started by asking what brought me in today. No preamble, no small talk about the weather, so I told her everything in a rush that surprised me. The proposal 3 days before the discovery, the hotel text that rewrote every recent memory, the way Ben had ended things with Lisa but not cleanly enough, the hotel room he was still paying for, Noah's unspoken worry, my own oscillating between wanting to burn the whole life down and wanting to salvage whatever scraps were left. And she listened without interrupting, only nodding when I paused to breathe, then asked gently, "What do you notice in your body when you talk about the betrayal?" And I had to close my eyes because the answer came fast, a tight coil in my stomach, heat behind my eyes, the same clenched feeling I got right before crying in the shower where no one could hear. And saying it out loud made the tears arrive anyway, hot and embarrassing. But she handed me the box of tissues without comment and waited until I could speak again. We spent the rest of the hour mapping the basics. How long the marriage had felt strained before the affair, at least a year, if I was honest. What trust used to look like, shared passwords, open phones, no second-guessing late nights. What it looked like now, separate locations, deleted threads I'd never unsee. And when she asked what I wanted most from these sessions, I surprised myself by saying, I want to know if I can ever look at him without seeing her. And she didn't promise an answer, just said we'd start with small practices, daily check-ins with my own feelings before reacting to his, journaling the moments when anger flipped to grief and back again, and one deliberate act of vulnerability each week, something tiny but intentional, like telling him one true thing about how the day felt without expecting a fix in return. I left the office later in a way that made no sense, still raw, still furious, still grieving, but with the faint sensation that the weight wasn't entirely mine to carry alone anymore. And when I got home, I texted Ben the bare minimum. Therapy started today. Individual for now. I'll let you know when if joint makes sense. And he replied almost immediately, "Thank you for telling me. I started looking for someone too. I'm proud of you for going." Which should have irritated me, his quick pivot to praise, but instead it landed somewhere soft, like the first crack of light under a door I'd slammed shut. And I didn't respond because words felt too big, but I didn't delete the message either. That evening, after Noah's homework and dinner, spaghetti from a jar, because energy was a finite resource, I sat on the back porch with a mug of chamomile while he played Minecraft upstairs, the early March air cool enough for a sweater, and I opened my journal for the first time in months, pen hovering before I wrote the smallest vulnerability I could manage. Today, I missed the way you used to make coffee exactly how I like it before I even asked. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just a fact that hurt to admit because it reminded me how much of our life had been quiet, ordinary kindness before it wasn't. I closed the notebook, looked at the ring still circling my finger, and for the first time considered keeping it on wasn't about pretending everything was fine. It was about leaving room for the possibility that one day it could mean something different, something rebuilt instead of broken. And though the thought felt dangerous, fragile as new skin over a wound, I let it sit there in the gathering dusk while the neighborhood lights came on one by one, steady and unhurried, like they knew time was the only thing that could possibly change anything at all. The first joint session landed on a Thursday 2 weeks later, like a date neither of us had circled on the calendar with excitement, just necessity. The kind of appointment you book when you've run out of ways to keep circling the same drain alone. And I drove to Dr. Marquez's office with the windows cracked, even though the March wind still carried winter's bite, because the car felt too small for the nervous energy humming under my skin. The ring still on my finger, but turned inward, so the diamond pressed against my palm whenever I gripped the wheel. A small, private reminder that I hadn't decided yet whether to keep wearing it as armor or surrender. And Ben was already in the waiting room when I arrived, sitting on the far end of the gray couch with his elbows on his knees, staring at the abstract print on the wall like it might offer him a way out. And when he saw me, he stood too quickly, the motion awkward and hopeful at once, murmuring, "Hey," in that soft voice he used to save for late-night apologies after arguments about whose turn it was to handle the midnight wake-ups when Noah was a baby. And I managed a small nod, sat on the opposite end of the couch so the space between us felt deliberate rather than accidental, and we waited in that charged quiet until the door opened and Dr. Marquez invited us in, her office still smelling faintly of lavender, but now also of the mints she kept in a bowl on the side table. And she started by asking us each to name one thing we hoped to get from being in the room together today. No long explanations, just one sentence. And Ben went first, voice low and rough around the edges. "I want to understand what I broke so I can help fix it, if there's anything left to fix." And the honesty in it caught me off guard because I'd braced for defensiveness or platitudes, but he looked straight at me when he said it, eyes steady despite the tremor in his hands clasped between his knees. And when it was my turn, I swallowed once and said, "I want to stop feeling like every memory we share is tainted so I can decide if I still want any new ones with you." And the words hung there heavy but clean, the first time I'd named the contamination out loud without rage swallowing the rest. And Dr. Marquez nodded, thanked us both, then asked Ben to start by telling me, in his own words, without excuses, what happened, why, and what he felt when he chose it over us. And he did, halting at first, then steadier, describing how the long hours and the distance that grew between us after Noah started middle school had left him feeling invisible in his own home, how Lisa had listened in a way that felt effortless when everything with me felt like effort lately, how the affair started as coffee and compliments and escalated because he told himself it was separate from the life we built, not a replacement, until the proposal became the moment he realized he was risking everything for something that couldn't survive daylight. And he cried while he spoke, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet leaking that happens when shame finally meets air. And I listened without interrupting, feeling the familiar coil in my stomach tighten and release in waves, anger rising when he mentioned her name, but also something softer when he admitted he'd hated himself every time he came home and saw me making Noah's lunch or laughing at one of his bad dad jokes, because that hate sounded real, sounded like the same self-loathing I'd been carrying since I read those texts. And when he finished, Dr. Marquez turned to me and asked what came up while he spoke, and I surprised myself by reaching for his hand across the small gap between our chairs, not to forgive, but to anchor myself while I said, "I felt invisible too, buried in deadlines and carpools and trying to be the mom who never cracks, and I didn't see how lonely you were because I was too busy surviving my own version of it." And his fingers closed around mine carefully, like he was afraid I'd pull away, but I didn't, not yet. The contact small and electric and terrifying because it was the first time since the discovery that touching him didn't feel like betrayal, just like two people who'd forgotten how to reach for each other, reaching anyway. The rest of the hour moved slowly, deliberately, Dr. Marquez guiding us through naming the deeper patterns, my tendency to retreat into work when hurt, his to seek external validation when unseen, the way we'd both stopped asking the hard questions after Noah's anxiety peaked last year, and we poured everything into keeping him steady, leaving our own foundation to erode quietly. And by the time we stood to leave, she suggested one homework assignment. Spend 10 minutes a day in the same room without phones or screens, no agenda, just presence. And if words came, they could, but silence was allowed too. And we agreed, shaking on it like a fragile contract, and when we stepped into the parking lot, the late afternoon sun was slanting low across the asphalt, warming the air for the first time in weeks. And Ben paused beside his car, looked at me with something raw and tentative in his expression, and asked, "Can I walk you to yours?" And I said yes, the words surprising us both. So we crossed the lot side by side, not touching, but close enough that our shadows overlapped on the pavement. And at my door, he stopped, hands in his pockets, and said quietly, "Thank you for coming today. for staying in the room? And I looked at him, really looked, past the guilt and the exhaustion, to the man I'd chosen once, and answered, I'm not promising anything beyond showing up, but I'm here for now. And he nodded like that was enough, more than enough, then watched me get into and start the engine before walking back to his own car, and I drove home with the window down, letting the wind tangle my hair while the radio played something soft and acoustic I didn't recognize. And when I pulled into the driveway, Noah was already home from after-school robotics, sitting on the front steps with his backpack beside him, sketching something in the little notebook he carried everywhere. And when he saw me, he stood and asked if Dad was coming for dinner tonight. The question careful but hopeful, and I told him we were working on some grown-up things, but maybe soon, and he accepted it with a shrug that didn't quite hide his relief at seeing me without the tight smile I'd worn for days. Then he followed me inside where I started dinner, chicken and rice because it was easy and familiar, and while the rice simmered, I texted Ben one line. 10 minutes tonight? Same room, no phones. He replied within seconds, I'll be there at 7:30. Thank you. And when he arrived right on time, knocking softly instead of using his key, I opened the door and let him in without a word. Led him to the living room where Noah was already sprawled on the couch with his tablet, glanced up and grinned at the sight of both parents in the same space. And Ben sat on the far end, I took the armchair, and for 10 silent minutes we just existed there together. Him watching Noah play a game, me pretending to read a magazine, the TV off, phones face down on the coffee table, and though no one spoke, the air felt different. Thicker with possibility than with tension. And when the timer on my watch beeped, Ben stood, said goodnight to Noah with a quick hug that lingered, then looked at me and whispered, same time tomorrow? And I nodded once, the smallest yes I could give, but it was enough to see the flicker of cautious hope in his eyes before he left, closing the door gently behind him. And later, after Noah was in bed, I sat on the couch in the dark, ring catching the hallway light, and let myself feel the quiet shift. Not forgiveness yet, not trust rebuilt, but the bare beginning of willingness to share the same oxygen again, one measured breath at a time. The idea for the weekend away came up almost accidentally during the third joint session, when Dr. Marquez asked what small, low-stakes thing we could do together outside the therapy room that might feel like shared ground instead of contested territory. And Ben suggested the cabin first, quietly, like he was testing the words before letting them out, because his parents still owned the little place upstate on the edge of the state park. 2 bedrooms, wood stove, no Wi-Fi unless you sat on the porch with your phone held just so, the same spot we'd taken Noah every summer since he was 4, for fishing and fireflies, and the kind of slow days where time felt stretchy instead of sliced into calendar blocks. And I surprised myself by not shutting it down immediately, just said I'd think about it, while the image flickered through my mind of Noah running down the pine needle path to the dock, of Ben teaching him how to skip stones, while I read on the Adirondack chairs with coffee going cold because I kept forgetting to drink it. Memories that still carried warmth, even if the edges were singed now. And after the session, Ben texted later that evening, no pressure, just the 3 of us, Friday after school to Sunday afternoon. I can handle groceries and firewood. You decide. And I stared at the message while Noah practiced piano scales in the next room, the notes stumbling, then steadying, and typed back after 10 minutes, okay, but separate rooms, and we talk about rules in the car on the way up. He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji, nothing more, and that restraint felt like the first real evidence that he was trying to listen instead of push. Friday came faster than expected, the minivan packed with duffels, Noah's sleeping bag because he insisted on camping out on the living room rug, even though there were beds, the cooler with sandwiches and fruit I'd prepped the night before while Ben loaded the firewood he'd bought into the back of his SUV, and when we met at the house to transfer everything, he kept his distance at first, hands in pockets, nodding hello to Noah who bounced between us like a shuttlecock, until I said quietly, you can ride with us if you want, and the relief that crossed his face was so unguarded it made my chest ache. So he climbed into the passenger seat while Noah sprawled in the middle row with his Switch, and we drove the 3 hours north in a careful quiet broken only by Noah's playlist of Minecraft parodies and the occasional question about how long until we hit the rest stop with the good soft pretzels. Halfway there, when Noah had finally dozed off with his head against the window, I glanced at Ben and said the rules I'd rehearsed in my head all week. No pretending everything's normal for Noah's sake. No big declarations or promises. No touching unless it happens naturally and we both agree in the moment. And if either of us needs space, we say it out loud. No guessing, no silent treatments. And he listened without interrupting, then added one of his own. If you want to talk about what happened, even if it's hard, I won't shut down. I'll stay in the room. And the promise landed heavier than I expected because it was the opposite of how he'd handled the early days, retreating to the guest room or the hotel when things got raw. So I nodded once, eyes on the highway, and said, deal. The cabin smelled like cedar and last summer's wood smoke when we walked in, sunlight slanting through the pines and pooling on the wide plank floors, and Noah immediately claimed his spot on the rug while Ben started the fire, and I unpacked the cooler, the ordinary movements feeling both familiar and fragile, like handling old china you're not sure is cracked yet. That first evening, we walked down to the lake after dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup because it was easy and Noah loved it, and sat on the dock while he threw stones, counting skips. And Ben sat a careful 2 feet away from me, knees drawn up, watching our son with the kind of quiet focus that used to make me fall in love with him all over again. And when Noah ran back to the cabin to grab his flashlight for catching fireflies, Ben turned to me and said softly, "I missed this. Not just the place. Us doing it together." And I let the words sit for a moment before answering, "I missed it too, but I'm still scared that missing it means I'll forget what happened." And he nodded like he'd expected that, then reached out slowly, palm up, an invitation rather than a grab, and after a long beat, I placed my hand in his, fingers threading together carefully, the contact warm and steady and not quite safe yet, but closer to it than anything had felt in months. And we sat like that until the first fireflies blinked on, Noah whooping as he chased them across the grass, until the chill drove us inside, where we made s'mores over the wood stove, chocolate melting onto fingers and laughter spilling out when Noah smeared marshmallow on Ben's cheek, and Ben retaliated by pretending to chase him around the couch. And later, after Noah finally crashed on his rug with the sleeping bag pulled to his chin, Ben and I stood in the kitchen washing dishes side by side, elbows brushing occasionally, no words needed because the silence felt companionable for the first time in forever. And when we finished, he dried his hands and looked at me across the counter, voice low. "Can I kiss you goodnight?" Not pushing, just asking. And I considered the question, felt the familiar coil of fear and want twist together, then stepped around the counter and let him press his lips to my forehead, lingering there long enough that I felt his heartbeat through the thin cotton of his shirt, steady and real. And when he pulled back, his eyes were wet but calm, and he whispered, "Thank you for letting me be here," before heading to the second bedroom alone. Saturday unfolded slowly. Morning pancakes with too much syrup, a hike along the easy trail where Noah found a salamander under a log, and we all crouched to watch it blink at us. Afternoon reading on the porch while Ben split more wood, and I pretended to follow my book, but mostly watched the way his shoulders moved, still familiar after all these years. And that evening, by the fire, Noah fell asleep early on the couch between us, head on my lap, feet on Ben's, and we didn't move for a long time, just sat with the crackle of logs and the weight of our son anchoring us, until Ben finally murmured, "I don't deserve this yet, but I'm going to keep showing up until maybe I do." And I answered without thinking, "I'm starting to believe you might." The admission's small, but seismic. And later, when we carried Noah to his rug and stood in the hallway afterward, Ben asked if he could hold me. Just hold. And I said yes, stepping into his arms, feeling the way his chin rested on my head like always, the scent of wood smoke and his shampoo wrapping around me, and we stood there swaying slightly until my shoulders loosened and the tears came quietly, not grief this time, but something closer to release. And when we finally separated, he kissed my temple again, said goodnight, and went to his second room alone, leaving the door cracked just enough that I could see the glow of his phone screen, as he probably texted his sponsor or journaled like Dr. Marquez had suggested, and I crawled into my own bed feeling bruised but not broken, the ring catching moonlight on the nightstand, where I'd finally taken it off to sleep but not to put away, and for the first time since the discovery, I fell asleep without replaying screenshots in my head. Only the sound of the lake lapping and Noah's soft breathing from the next room, a quiet proof that some things were still whole, even if others were still mending. 1 year to the day since the rain-soaked afternoon when Ben's phone lit up on the kitchen island, and the future I'd been sketching shattered into something unrecognizable. I woke up to the soft gray light of early March filtering through the bedroom curtains we'd replaced last fall because the old ones had started to feel like relics of a different life. And the house was quiet, except for the distant clink of a spoon against a cereal bowl downstairs where Noah, now 13 and taller than me when he stood straight, was probably eating standing at the counter while scrolling through whatever game update had dropped overnight. And I lay there for a long minute, feeling the familiar weight of the ring still on my left hand. Not the original diamond Ben had slid onto my finger that night at the bistro, but the simpler band we'd chosen together 6 months ago after months of joint sessions and separate ones and weekend cabin trips that tested every boundary we'd rebuilt brick by careful brick. A plain gold circle that carried no promise of perfection, but a quiet acknowledgement that we'd chosen to stay and keep choosing day after imperfect day. I slipped out of bed in the soft socks I kept by the nightstand, padded downstairs past the framed photo on the landing, the three of us on that dock last spring, Noah holding up a fish he'd caught, Ben's arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder, all of us smiling in a way that looked earned rather than posed, and found Ben already at the stove flipping pancakes because it was Saturday, and Saturday mornings had become his quiet ritual again, the way he used to do before everything cracked, only now he asked first if I wanted blueberries or plain, and waited for my answer instead of assuming, and when I said blueberries, he nodded without fanfare, just a small upward curve of his mouth that still made something warm unfold in my chest, even if it wasn't the wild rush it used to be. Noah wandered in mid-yawn, hoodie sleeves pulled over his hands, and slid onto a stool at the island, mumbling, "Morning," before stealing a piece of bacon from the plate Ben was building, and Ben pretended to swat his hand away, but let him have it anyway. The easy teasing that had come back slowly, not forced, but rediscovered like an old song you hadn't heard in years, but still knew every word to. And I poured coffee into the mug Ben had already set out for me, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, exactly how I liked it, and sat beside Noah, our shoulders brushing in that casual way that felt safe again, no longer carrying the ghost of distance. We ate, mostly in companionable quiet broken by Noah's occasional commentary on the new season of whatever show he was watching on Netflix, and when he finished, he grabbed his skateboard from the hall closet because he'd promised friends he'd meet them at the park, kissed my cheek without thinking about it the way he used to when he was smaller, then fist bumped Ben on his way out the door with a "see you later, don't be weird," that made us both laugh softly once the screen door clicked shut behind him, and Ben cleared the plates while I stayed at the island, watching the way his movements had lost that careful stiffness they carried for months after the hotel nights, the way he no longer flinched when our eyes met across the room like he expected accusation. And when he turned from the sink, drying his hands on a dish towel, he looked at me for a long beat before saying quietly, "1 year today." Not as a milestone to celebrate with balloons or cake, but as a fact we both knew carried weight. And I nodded, tracing the edge of my mug with my thumb, and answered, "Yeah, 1 year since I thought we were done." He came around the island then, slow enough that I could have stepped away if I'd wanted, but I didn't, and he stopped in front of me, close but not crowding, and asked, "Do you still think that sometimes?" Because that was the new rule we'd both learned in therapy, no assuming the other's headspace, always checking. And I thought about it honestly, let the old shadows flicker through without letting them take over, then said, "Sometimes, when I'm tired or when a memory hits sideways, but not the way I used to, not like it's the only truth anymore." He exhaled like he'd been holding the breath since he asked, then reached for my hand, fingers lacing through mine the way they had on that dock a year ago, steady now instead of tentative. And I let him, felt the callus on his palm from the firewood he still split on cabin weekends, and he said, "I still wake up some mornings expecting you to be gone, like I'll reach over and the bed will be empty and I'll deserve it. But then you're there, and I get another day to prove I'm worth staying for." The words weren't new. We'd said versions of them in sessions and late-night talks on the couch after Noah was asleep, but hearing them here in the ordinary light of a Saturday kitchen, with pancake batter still on the stove and Noah's skateboard wheels rumbling down the driveway outside, made them land differently, softer, more like truth than confession, and I squeezed his hand once before saying, "I'm still here, not because I have to be, because I want to be, and that feels different, better." We stood like that for a while, the house settling around us with its familiar creaks and the faint hum of the refrigerator. No rush to fill the silence, because we'd learned that quiet could hold good things too, not just tension. And eventually, Ben leaned in and kissed me, not the careful forehead presses of the early months, but a real kiss, slow and sure, tasting of coffee and maple syrup, and the kind of forgiveness that doesn't erase scars, but learns to live alongside them. And when we pulled apart, I rested my forehead against him, breathing him in, the same scent I'd known since we were 23, but now layered with everything we'd carried through the wreckage and out the other side. Later that afternoon, Noah came home, flushed from the park, dropped his skateboard by the door, and asked if we could order pizza and watch the new Marvel thing on Disney Plus, because it was basically tradition now. And we said yes, ordered the usual, half pepperoni for him, half veggie for us, and piled onto the couch, Noah in the middle like always, Ben's arms stretched along the back behind me, fingers occasionally brushing my shoulder in a way that felt natural instead of deliberate. And as the credits rolled and Noah started yawning, I glanced at Ben over our son's head, caught the small smile he gave me that said everything we didn't need to voice right then. We're still here. We're still choosing. We're scarred, but standing. And I leaned into his side, let my head rest on his shoulder while Noah's breathing evened out into sleep between us, the television glow flickering across the room, the ring on my finger catching the light in a quiet promise that wasn't about perfection or starting over clean, but about showing up, day after day, for the harder, truer version of love we'd built from the pieces we'd refused to throw away. And in that ordinary moment, with pizza boxes on the coffee table and the faint sound of traffic outside, and our son's steady heartbeat against my side, I felt something settle deep inside. Not the fairy tale certainty I'd once imagined, but a hard-earned, realistic hope that whispered, we might just make it. Not in spite of the cracks, but because of the way we'd learned to mend around them, together.